by the other's fumbling progress through unfamiliar territory, the scuffle of steps slipping on loose sand, the careless crunch of seashells beneath his feet, the rustle of dried grasses against his legs. Bit by bit, Thomas closed the distance between them. Eventually they reached a clearing where a small cabin stood, elevated on stilts to withstand the strong tropical storms. It formed the base for Thomas's lookout operations, though he also kept rooms in Roseau, where he went whenever it became necessary to gather other sorts of information or sometimes to send communiques. The stranger nosed about, first examining the structure, then peering into the dark woods that surrounded it. When he set one foot on the lowest rung of the ladder that led to the door, preparing to ascend, Thomas spoke. "Where I come from, it's customary to wait for an invitation." The unexpected sound of a human voice produced exactly the response he expected. The man turned suddenly, lost his footing, and tumbled to the ground before locating Thomas as he emerged from the shadows just a few feet away. "Bloody hell!" the man rasped, the air having been driven from his lungs by a combination of shock and the fall. "What are you doing?" His uncertain gaze shifted from Thomas's simple linen clothes to his primitive little cottage, to the curved blade of his knife. "When they said you'd been here too long, Sutherland, they weren't wrong." He had the voice of a public school prefect, almost too flawless an English accent to be believed. Thomas took another step forward. "Aye, and what else did they tell you?" "The password, you'd best hope." Password? I'm Captain Bancroft of the Colchester." Desperation now sharpened his drawling speech, and he scrambled backward as he spoke, scooting across the dirt like a frightened crab. "I come bearing a dispatch from General Zebediah Scott." A string of specifics primed to win a man's confidence. Thomas, however, held his in reserve. Had it always been in his nature to expect a lie? To suspect a trap? Perhaps he had been here too long. After a brief pause, the other man spoke again. "General Scott says, 'Homeward, Magnus.'" Despite his vulnerable position, Bancroft, if that was indeed his name, enunciated the message like a man with no intention of repeating himself, not even at knife point. But repetition would serve little purpose. Thomas had heard him perfectly. He held himself rigid, determined not to betray the internal disturbance caused by two simple words. With them, any doubt about the genuineness of either Bancroft's identity or his mission had evaporated. Apparently interpreting Thomas's stillness as confusion, Bancroft dared a slight clearing of his throat. "You have the necessary cipher, I assume?" A long, deliberate pause. "Nay." Because for once, there was no code to be broken. Magnus was too obscure and too personal to require encryption. Though Thomas had not heard it for many years, the name was perfectly familiar. How it should come to be addressed to him here was the real enigma, but no mere cipher could provide the necessary clarification. Only General Scott could do that, and he evidently preferred to explain in person rather than relay the whys and wherefores through an intermediary. Out of habit, Thomas cocked his head in a listening posture, though his thoughts were too jumbled for him to hear anything beyond the roar of his blood in his ears. Fortunately, all of his senses had not deserted him. A sudden gust of perfume filled his nostrils. Night-blooming jasmine, again. And with it came the familiar memory. A woman's upturned face. Nut-brown hair, plump cheeks, blue eyes. He tried to shake her picture from his mind. Good God, what had stirred the branches of that infernal shrub? There was no wind to speak of, and they'd come too far from the beach to blame the ocean breeze for driving the scent. Something, or someone, was on the move nearby. With a swift, silent lunge, he closed the distance between him and Bancroft. Before the captain could react, Thomas had dragged him half upright and pinned him to one of the stilts that supported the cabin, using both the man's body and the stout wooden post as a shield against the intruder. With one hand, he twisted Bancroft's arms behind his back, while with the other he held the knife to the man's neck. "Christ!" Bancroft whimpered, almost a prayer. The movement of the man's throat made the blade twitch. Reluctantly, Thomas shifted the position of his hand. He had no desire to spill blood. Yet.